For myself, getting involved with this, it goes back to 1994 when I retired from the Army as a captain. I began to ask the correct questions. See, right now we've been asking the wrong questions. That's why we haven't been getting the right answers. Once you start to ask the right questions, then you have an idea of where you need to go to get the answers. And I began to ask questions for myself, which took me down this path. And a lot of my training at that time was purely from the military, professional training as an officer. I had a bachelor's degree from 1987 at the University of Hawaii, but I didn't have a research degree. I didn't have a master's degree, nor did I have a PhD. But I just wanted to dig, and I liked what Umi brought up, and I'm seeing it from an academic standpoint. Something very Hawaiian, which is genealogy, mo'oku auhau. Genealogy as a methodology. That's cool. I think you got to develop that one, because you're going to be basically creating at the academic world something that is understood in the Kanaka world as far as culture, as far as approach. So when you look to the future, you look to the past. What is the past? The mo'olelo, the history. What is the history? A mo'oku auhau of events. That's where you capitalize on successes and you learn from mistakes. That's where I firmly believe in that the practical value of history is that it's a film of the past run through the projector of today onto the screen of tomorrow. That film never changes, but your projector has to get updated. And as we update our projector, now we see things that we didn't see from this film that we cannot change. But now we see something, and that's what we call ike, foresight. And at first, what you may see, I guarantee you might be scary, might be shocking, but you can't deny it. That's what happened. And once you have that ike, then you have kuleana. And once you identify your kuleana, then you maximize it. And then you accomplish what you need to do. So if I'm a teacher, I'm going to maximize that kuleana to be a really good teacher. If I'm a police officer, I'm going to maximize that kuleana to be a good police officer and follow the law, right? Now, what law? Well, that's part of the education. That's part of understanding what's going on. So that's what pretty much drove me to do what I'm doing now. Now, back in 1994 when I retired, there were certain actions taken back then that got me where I'm at now, where I'm in international proceedings, which stem from the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. What I want to do today is to provide that context. What happened, but more importantly, what is the context in order to understand what happened, right? So before I can explain a play made during the Super Bowl, yeah? You need to understand the theory of football, not the play. Once you understand the theory of how football is played, then you can appreciate the play and understand that was a good play. Otherwise, you're just going to see something that happened and maybe jump to a conclusion because you're going to rely on something you thought you knew when it has nothing to do with what you're actually looking at. In the academic world, we also call that comprehension. Reading comprehension is very important, right? At the university level, it's crucial because words have meaning and meaning have consequences. And once you understand that, then you can start putting things together within a research paper. Yeah? So that's what we do at that level. My job is to break it down into making it very user-friendly. Okay? You guys all good? Okay? Okay, so converging international law with Hawaiian history, an unexpected reality. This is big. Just happened 4th of July. And you folks should have the handout. Hawaii State Teachers Association at the National Education Association in Boston, Massachusetts, this past 4th of July, a couple weeks ago, got the National Education Association, the largest union of school teachers in America that the HSTA is an affiliate member to adopt a resolution that states the NEA, the National Education Association, will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. That's big. This is not political. This is education. That's what's important. And then from the HSTA's Facebook, they write, mahalo to Chris Santomaro, a teacher at Kaneohe Elementary, who introduced the proposal, and Uluhani Waialeale, a teacher at Kualapu'u Charter School on Molokai, whose impassioned and articulate argument in favor of the Hawaiian overthrow measure swayed a majority of teachers from across the country to support it. Wow. That's awesome. I pretty much can guarantee you that the teachers that are teaching about Hawaii's occupation probably came through one of our classes at the University of Hawaii, right? And that's the impact right there, where they are taking their kuleana and maximizing it. That's important. Very important. Amy Peruso, right here. She's the Secretary-Treasurer of HSTA, the union. She's a very good friend of mine. She also has a master's degree in political sciences. I met her through Umi. Yeah, they're all friends. Amy Peruso has been teaching about Hawaii's occupation, I would say, 2006 at least, yeah? Did you know that she teaches at Mililani High School, where a lot of her students are military, because Schofield Barracks. Yeah. Well, she has no problems with them, because she doesn't politicize what she's teaching. She's a historian. And she was actually a runner-up for Teacher of the Year by the National Education Association. But she actually used my doctoral dissertation from 2008 with freshmen and sophomores. And she would have to break it down. So she's really happy that a book came out called Ua Mau Ke'ea, which, if you folks have that handout that explains the HSTA, there's a link that you can go to order the book. That is a required reading at the university for classes. And that's what she uses now. Even Umi uses the book at Kamehameha schools for students. I heard that it's also used at Punahou, Iolani. So education is crucial, and that's number one. Just as our kupuna in the 19th century said that our primary policy, and especially in this case, King Kamehameha III, my kingdom is the kingdom of the palapala. Palapala is not paper. Palapala is literacy. Literacy is comprehension, not just reading. Yeah? So I wanted to start off with that, and I congratulate them for that. And I like the fact that I had nothing to do with it. Indirectly. But this was all on their own, and that's what people do. When you have kuleana, you do it. And the fact that they were able to get the representatives, the majority from across America to vote in favor, wow. My hat's off to Uluani. Awesome. Now, that's when they say occupation, the illegal occupation, we need to understand the context of that, right? What is an illegal occupation? Is it somebody who comes into your yard and say, I'm occupying your house? Well, you might call that trespassing. Or is it one country invading another country? And the word occupation is an international word that means stemming from war. Yeah? These things we need to understand. So what's behind the illegal occupation? Well, we have to understand, first of all, what state of affairs exists in international relations between countries. My PhD specializes in international relations and public law. But my focus is on Hawaii's legal and political history. But I'm trained as a political scientist in international relations, in law, in these type of theories and understandings. So within international relations, you have what is called two state of affairs. Now, this guy, Judge Greenwood, he's a judge on the International Court of Justice. He says there are only two state of affairs: state of peace and a state of war. Countries were either in a state of peace or in a state of war. Now, every country wants to be in peace and prosper, but did you know international law actually regulates war, because war is considered, back then and till today, a form of dispute resolution, where the country or countries become judge, jury, and executioner. So international law then regulates war. Okay? And that's called the laws of war, which include the laws of occupation. What's important about this is there's no intermediate stage. It's like you either hapai or you're not. Yeah? You don't think you hapai, right? You either hapai, you're pregnant, or you're not. Same thing with state of war. You're either in a state of war or in a state of peace. But there are certain trigger words in the international arena that would trigger, like in the case of a pregnancy. You know what triggers a pregnancy, right? Okay, I don't have to go there. But you also need to know what triggers a state of war and certain words. One of the main words that are used that will trigger a state of war under international law is act of war. Act of war, not somebody seeing something and assessing it, but the determination, called a political determination by head of state, like the President of the United States. When he says act of war, that means we're in war. Now, if a senator says it, if an attorney general says it in America, that's not representing the United States. But once the head of state says it, it has ramifications. Okay. So just as I said, it's a form of dispute resolution. The important on this is there's a difference between what is called a just war and an unjust war. Okay? An aggressive war is an unjust war, and today it's called a war crime. That's what Europe experienced with Adolf Hitler. Aggressiveness, invasion. That is an unjust war, but a war nevertheless, and to be regulated. You may also have a just war, right? There's actually a dispute that you have with this country, and that's the last resort. So a just war can only come about through a last resort. You don't start your national policy by invading. You start with diplomacy. If it doesn't work, you're justified, right? So that's how it's supposed to work. That's why international law regulates war. So we need to know that there are 4 stages of war, the state of war. 4 stages. First stage, act of war. Something's initiated. So we'll use an example. Well, I'm going to follow up with that example later, dealing with the United States and Japan. So first stage, act of war. The president or head of state of another country says, these certain actions taken by our military is an act of war. That's the trigger. Then they fight, and they fight until they can get a surrender. So the goal of the military, or the militaries of the 2 countries at war, is to subjugate the other side, meaning you overthrow the government, you control it. The evidence of that control is the Treaty of Surrender, right? You have a surrender. Now, a surrender does not transform the state of affairs to a state of peace. It just ends hostilities. Then a surrender is normally followed by belligerent occupation, where they implement the treaty, right? The understanding, the agreements embodied in that treaty. And then ultimately, it transforms itself back to a state of peace with a treaty of peace. So it goes back to a state of peace through a treaty of peace. A lot of people tend to confuse treaty of surrender with the treaty of peace. No, surrender merely ceases hostilities. An example of a situation where you have a state of war still existing today, Korea. All you have after the Korean conflict was an armistice, creating the 38th parallel. It's still a state of war. There's no treaty of peace. Okay? So that's an example of one existing. But if you go to Seoul, Korea, and you start shopping, eating some really good food, it doesn't look like Korea is in a state of war. Okay, that's just perception. From a legal standpoint, it's still in a state of war. And you're starting to hear that on CNN, on MSNBC. And the military are admitting it's still a state of war. And they have to be careful how they're going to deal with Kim Jong-un. Yeah? Now, 3 types of warfare. You have physical warfare, which would terminate during a treaty of surrender. But a treaty of surrender which terminates a particular form of warfare may not preclude other forms of warfare to be applied, such as economic warfare and psychological warfare. Okay, so let's kind of keep this in mind on how state of war operates. So let's apply it to Japan. December 7, 1941, Japanese forces attack American military in the Hawaiian Kingdom. Notice I said in the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? Now, when they attacked, okay, the United States in Hawaii, President Roosevelt on December 7th, 1941, made a statement, public statement, that the actions taken by the Japanese military was in and itself an act of war. What he just did was he triggered state of war. Now, December 8th is when the U.S. Congress declared war, a day after. But it was actually December 7th that initiated the state of war, not the declaration of war by the U.S. Congress. And I'll give you a court case that proves it. New York Life Insurance, in 1946, New York Life Insurance versus Banyan. Banyan was an officer who was killed in the Pearl Harbor attack, a naval officer. He had an insurance policy, life insurance, but there was an exclusion. It did not cover death during war. The family was arguing that war did not begin until Congress declared it on December 8th, therefore his death was not during war. The federal court rejected the argument and said, no, it's not the Congress as a prerequisite, but rather the United States as the representative of the United States in international relations, his statement. So as soon as President Roosevelt said act of war, that was a state of war, therefore Banyan could not, the policy was not covered. They didn't cover his death. And the court said the declaration of war was not a prerequisite, but just a formality. Okay? So act of war triggered state of war December 7th, 1941. And then in 1945, the Treaty of Surrender signed on the USS Missouri in Japan ended hostilities. That was in 1945, which initiated belligerent occupation of Japan, headed by General MacArthur as the military governor administering Japanese law during the occupation that lasted for 7 years, from 1945 to 1952, until a treaty of peace was signed in 1952. Well, actually it was signed in 51, but took effect in 52. That treaty was signed in San Francisco. That effectively transformed the state of war to a state of peace in 1952. So you can see how the stages have played out with regard to Japan. So let's take a look at Italy. 1938 to 1947. War initiated by Mussolini and his invasion. State of war. Second stage, Mussolini is captured. The Italian government, the fascist government, surrenders. Belligerent occupation takes place until 1947, where you had a treaty of peace. So here you have the stages. Okay. So you folks, can you kind of understand how war works? I'm not trying to be dismal, let's talk war. It's actually an international process. And I think we're starting to watch it on CNN, and we're starting to understand now why things are being said by certain people. Okay? So if war is an international term, and it only applies to countries, we got to determine whether or not Hawaii is a country. Okay? So, Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands, Arbitration Award, 2001, stated, in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state. Now, We today are using words completely wrong, completely off base. The sovereignty movement, right? Everybody heard of the sovereignty movement, right? Okay, the sovereignty movement operates on the false premise that Hawaii is a part of the United States, and you have certain groups who want to try to break away from the United States. So it's called a movement towards sovereignty. It's called an independence movement, yeah? Or movement toward independence. It doesn't operate on the premise that Hawaii already is independent, but occupied, okay? So terminology, very important. The term self-determination. Self-determination does not apply to an occupied territory. Self-determination applies to a people who wish to exercise a right to possibly become a country. So sovereignty is an aspiration in the sovereignty movement, whereas our kupuna in the kingdom era, being the head of state, Queen Liliuokalani, they were operating on sovereignty already in the country. They're just exercising that authority through a constitutional system of government. That's different. So we have to understand that our mo'okuauhau becomes our methodology to understand where we are now, because we can only be what we were. So if Hawaii was an independent state, then how did it somehow become a part of the United States? Well, I think Umi kind of covered some of that, and Willie covered that, but I'm going to touch on it a bit more in order to bring you to the international proceedings that have started. Okay. Oops. The word independent is a political term. It's not a physical being. So when you have an independent state, which it says it right there, 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state. Independent means that only your laws exist over your territory, independent of other laws. As opposed to another state that is not independent, but it may be dependent on another state. Okay, that's different. So you can be a state and not be independent. Give you an example. New York. Did you know New York was actually an independent state all on its own? From 1776, no, actually, sorry, that was the start of the revolution. From 1783, which was the Treaty of Surrender between King George III and the former 13 colonies, from 1783 to 1789. For 6 years, only New York law applied over New York territory. But they were in a loose union called a confederation. And King George III recognized them in the Treaty of Surrender as 13 independent states in a confederation. In 1789, these 13 independent states gave up their independence into a federal government. So New York was still a state, but not independent after 1789, because you have more than just New York law that would apply over New York territory. You would also have federal law created by the US Congress. So you have a duality of legal systems that didn't exist before 1789. So does that make sense? Okay. So when they recognized Hawaii, acknowledged that Hawaii was an independent state in the 19th century, that means that every country in the world at that time recognized that only Hawaiian Kingdom law applied over Hawaiian territory, and any of their citizens that come to Hawaii are subject to those laws. They cannot claim to be protected by American law, by British law, by French law. But not all states in the 19th century were independent, and I'm going to cover one of them. But does that make sense? So can you understand again, let's revisit the sovereignty movement or the independence movement that wouldn't apply if Hawaii is already independent. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration already verified that. It acknowledged that. Now in 1893, did you know that there were only 44 independent states, which included Hawaii? 44. 1945, the creation of the UN, 46. It only increased by 2. But today, there are 193. The balance of the 46 came about through decolonization, where people exercise self-determination to become independent states. The only time you apply self-determination to an independent state is the maintenance of its independence. That's its self-determination. Not that it's trying to become another country, which already is. But if you're not a country, the process of decolonization allows you to become your country. And that's how the 193 countries were established beyond the original 46 in 1945. Okay. That flag right there, okay, is quite interesting. You guys notice there's a Union Jack on it. And I've heard people, oh, it was a British colony, oh, it's a bad history, oh, a lot of assumptions on British colonialism, right? Well, the problem is, you need to understand what is a colony in order to say Hawaii was colonized by the British. Actually, Hawaii was not colonized. The Kingdom of Hawaii, the island Kingdom of Hawaii, which existed at the time the Kingdom of Maui existed, the Kingdom of Kauai existed. The Kingdom of Hawaii, Kamehameha I was the king. They joined the British Empire. They made an agreement with Captain Vancouver. Yeah, they joined the British Empire. Now, they didn't get colonized by the British, they joined the British. You know how you can tell if it was a colony? Your government that used to have there is replaced by the colonizer's government. And in British legal context, it's called a governor general. When you send a governor general, like they did to Aotearoa, New Zealand, you send a governor general to Canada, to Australia, you are the representative of the Queen of England. And you are going to be administering British rules, British law. Was there a governor general in Hawaii? Nope. In fact, Kamehameha I was still king, even under the old religion. But he was moving toward conforming himself to British governance. In fact, Kamehameha, after the Battle of Nu'uanu, where the Kingdom of Maui was consolidated, he introduced the prime minister, the term prime minister. Kalani Moku was the prime minister. Kalani Moku, as a prime minister, the foreigners used to call him Billy Pitt. Why would he call him Billy Pitt? Because his counterpart, the prime minister of Great Britain at that very same time under King George III, was William Pitt the Younger. That's where Billy Pitt came from. So when you have foreigners coming into Hawaii referring to Kalani Moku as Billy Pitt, they are acknowledging this is British. That's what was there. So that's the flag. 1816, Kamehameha ordered the design of that flag. Hawaii was never a colony of Great Britain. Actually, Hawaii had a very unique relationship with Great Britain, very different from our cousins in Aotearoa. Very different. In 1843, the British recognized Hawaiian independence. See, that's when we separated from Great Britain. And Hawaii became an independent state. And that was on November 28, 1843. So Hawaii actually exercised self-determination, right? And became an independent state in 1843. But it was a protectorate under Great Britain, very similar to Tonga. Tonga, as well, did not have a British governor general in Tongan territory. King Tupou was still king, just as King Kamehameha was king. And today, Tonga is an independent state. So what they achieved in the 1960s from Great Britain, we achieved in 1843. Make sense? And you don't hear any Tongans calling themselves indigenous people, because indigenous people implies you're not a country yet and you have a right to self-determination. But yet our own people keep using the term self-determination. Well, those terms only apply during a state of peace. We have to find out whether or not we're in a state of war. Different rules would definitely apply. These folks following me? Is good? Okay. Okay, so that's why Hawaii could enter into these treaties that acknowledged Hawaiian independence. So their citizens who come to Hawaii, whether they do business or they reside, is subject to Hawaiian law. The civil code, the criminal code, the courts, the proceedings, the administration. Austria-Hungary. Austria and Hungary used to be a combined monarchy. Austro-Hungarian Empire. 1875. Belgium. Now Belgium, as Umi pointed out, received their independence from the Netherlands in 1832. Yeah. So they weren't an independent state prior to 1832. They were actually Dutch, right? And then it broke off and became independent. Bremen. Now, Today we think of Germany. Did you know Germany was actually formed, I believe, 1874? Germany was actually, the German area was made up of Germanic states in a confederation. They were independent, very similar to the American independent states in a confederation after the revolution. So these countries, the most powerful one was Prussia, okay? And Prussia was the driver on consolidating and bringing all the German states into a federal system, which we call today Germany. That's 1874. Well, back in 1851, Bremen was a Germanic state. Germany did not exist. Hawaii had a treaty with them. We were doing trade. Okay? Denmark, France, Germany, 1879, 4 or 5 years after they became their own independent state. But Germany is an interesting case because under German constitutional law, did you know the treaties that the former states had before Germany was created? Those treaties still existed, independent of the German treaty. So a Bremen treaty would still exist, even though Germany existed. But that's German constitutional law. Great Britain, Hamburg, that's another Germanic state, which was, the treaty was entered in 1848, prior to the formation of Germany. Italy, 1863. This is pretty cool. So Umi said I might share a story about that. 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, there was a wahine who was doing her doctoral research from Torino, which is a city in, I don't think she's from the University of Torino, but she works with the University of Torino. She came to Hawaii, and she used to work for the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Rights. And she thought, like we all did, because I used to think that as well until I found out otherwise, that we're indigenous, we've been colonized, and maybe we have rights to self-determination. So she came to Hawaii with that mindset to do her doctoral research. So she met with Dr. Lynette Cruz from Hawaii Pacific University, and Lynette told her, I think you might want to talk to Dr. Sai because the theories have shifted away from colonial theory to occupation and statecraft or state sovereignty. Okay? So we had lunch, and the first thing I did to Manu, her name is Emanuela, very olu wahine. First thing I did was, did you know that Hawaii had a treaty with Italy? And I gave her a copy of that treaty written in English and Italian. And she was like, wow. I said, do indigenous people that you know of in the Permanent Forum have treaties of this stature with Italy? She goes, no. Then I showed her a registry, a government registry that identified the location of Hawaiian consulates in Italy. Palermo, Naples, Rome, Torino. Wow. With all due respect, do indigenous peoples, do they have consulates in your country like this? She goes, no. That was my segue into Hawaii being occupied, and Italy had a relationship with Hawaii. 5 students, 5 young men and women, 1 woman, Miley Boyd, right, were sent to Italy for education in the 1880s. Miley Boyd, a wahine, was sent to the University of Torino, the same university Emanuel is from, to learn sculpture. How's that? Learn sculpture from the leading carver, I don't know what you call them, sculptress. I'm poli-sci, so I'm not, art is not my area, but to learn. And also, did you know Robert Wilcox, Willie Cookie? Robert Wilcox was in Torino attending the Italian Royal Military Academy. He was trained as a field artillery officer, just like me, but I was trained by the United States. He was trained by the Italians. The other Boyd, I don't know if it's Miley's brother, the other Boyd attended Naples Military Academy. She was kind of tripping out on this because this is not what she expected when she came to Hawaii. So she attended one of my classes up at UH, it was Windward Community College. She filmed it, and that became a part of her doctoral research. And then I get an email 3 years later. She says, Keanu, this is Manu. I hope you remember me. Blah, blah, blah. So I did. And she says, I've been giving many lectures here at Italy in Italian about the Hawaiian Kingdom. And they want me to be a part of a few presentations. And I told them, why don't you just bring the guy that taught me from Hawaii? So she said, you'll be expecting an invitation to come. All expense paid. My wife saw that. She said, I going. We don't have to worry about getting another room because you're going to be sleeping with me. We just got to figure out how to pay for you on the plane. But she worked Hawaiian Airlines, so we had to figure out from New York, how do we get over? But she could get to New York because she works Hawaiian. I was invited to give a presentation at Ravenna on the east coast of Italy at a conference. Then at in Florence, or Firenze, as they say. And then from Florence, gave a guest lecture at the University of Siena, the law school, which is in Tuscany, and then University of Torino. So when I went there, I saw her, and she tells me, Keanu, I have to tell you that after our talk, you just threw my whole world upside down. Everything I thought was gone. I had to reassess everything. And this is a doctoral dissertation. This is not some political article. She said that she wanted to find the Italian version of what I showed her, because I brought it from our side. So she was told that the Royal Library in Torino, which she didn't even know existed, because Torino used to be the capital of Italy during the Kingdom era, but in 1945 it changed to Rome because they banned the monarchy. They made the wrong decision of siding with Mussolini. So basically Italians said, pow, with the monarchy. Then the capital went to Rome. But she went to the library and she said that she went in there to find the treaty. As she said, when you walk in, and she took me there, when you walk in, on the left side are all the treaties of Italy that have been canceled or superseded. All the treaties on the right side are still in effect. So she did find the Hawaiian-Italian treaty on the left side. So she's telling the librarian, this is wrong. Hawaii's occupied. The treaty still exists. It was never canceled. And the librarian said, no, Hawaii's the 50th state. Everybody knows that. She goes, no, I'm doing my doctoral dissertation on this. And it's all in Italian. She recommends to her, why don't you write a letter to the directorate of the library, a government official, explain who you are, that you are a doctoral candidate, this is your research, and provide them the information and we'll take it from there. So she tells me 4 months later, she receives a letter from the director thanking her for bringing it to their attention and that they went ahead and moved the treaty back to the other side. True story. What's so great about it? Again, I had nothing to do with it, but maybe I did. But it was all in Italian. Amongst Italians, talking about Italian history. This had nothing about native Hawaiians or culture and self-determination. That treaty still exists. So she went and published an article. She sent it to me. It's all in Italian, but I see Keanu, I see Sai, I see Permanent Court of Arbitration. One thing I learned in Italy, prego, thank you, prego. She actually went through a peer review process for that article. And her experience, she put it in an academic form. And it was peer reviewed, refereed by other professors. And they were saying, no, Hawaii was annexed by a treaty because here's the citation from an Italian history book. It says there was a treaty. She says, no, there's no treaty. It's a joint resolution. A joint resolution is limited to U.S. territory, blah, blah, blah. And the referees were going, whoa. So she was deconstructing Italian scholarship regarding Hawaii and its annexation. And she ultimately got it published. She published it. So a friend of mine is Kippin from the Friends of Iolani Palace. Yeah? And I shared with Kippin Manu's article. Now, why would I show Kippin, a Hawaiian, graduate of Punahou? Okay, we won't hold that against them. Joke. Okay. The reason why I'm going to give it to Kippin, because Kippin actually spent a year in Italy at the University of Bologna. He speaks Italian. And he was able to read it. And that really brought in his perception, while Italy is talking about what we're talking about, but from an Italian perspective. And that's pretty cool. Make sense? Good story? It's happening all over the world. Hawaii is not just between us. The issue here is not just between us and the United States. This is Hawaii and the world. And these treaties and our relationships prove it. Hawaii had a treaty with Japan, 1871. Hawaii had an embassy in Tokyo. Minister Irwin was running it on behalf of the country, the kingdom. Did you know Japan was not recognized as an independent state at this time? Although it was a state, it was a country. Did you know that it had unequal treaties? British, German, Russian, Norwegian, if their citizens get into trouble in Japan, they can only be prosecuted under their laws by their consulate within Japan, called consular jurisdiction. Okay? Did you know the Hawaiian kingdom had an unequal treaty with Japan? Any Hawaiian subject, remember that's a nationality, not ethnicity, any Hawaiian subject in trouble in Japan could only be prosecuted under Hawaiian kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate to serve as the trier of facts. We're just like Russia and Great Britain. And did you know when Kalakaua traveled the world, he visited Japan, and he had a meeting with the emperor, the Meiji emperor. And the emperor asked him, would you be the first power to recognize Japan's full independence? Well, when he came home, he ran into the hornet's nest called the Bayonet Constitution. But did you know it was his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, in 1893, that dispatched a directive to Irwin that arrived in Japan on January 18th. But it was sent from Hawaii before that, where Hawaii would extend full recognition of Japan's independence, and any Hawaiian subject will be subject to Japanese law, and that they rescind consular jurisdiction. Did you know in the history books, they say that it was Great Britain that did that in 1894? It was actually the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. So you see what's starting to happen. This information that we're uncovering has some major effects on the academic world and the research that we thought we knew, which is now being revisited. The Netherlands, treaty with the Netherlands. Portugal, Russia, Samoa, Spain, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, and the United States. Also in 3 of these treaties, Hawaii's status not only as an independent state was acknowledged, but it was also acknowledged that Hawaii was neutral. Neutral. Neutrality is important because in international relations, you could go into a state of war. If a territory is neutral, you don't invade it. It is considered inviolable, its territory. You cannot trespass on it. Hawaii was a recognized Switzerland in the middle of the Pacific. So it operated in a very different way, right? That didn't mean you don't have a military. Hawaii did. Even Switzerland has a military. But you're neutral. You're protected additionally under international law. And that's another important note to know, that Hawaii was not only an independent state, but a neutral state, because should a war break out between Great Britain and France, and they're fighting in the Pacific, Hawaii is neutral territory that they could come in to refurbish, but they have to disarm. Take care of what they gotta do, leave Hawaii, rearm, and you go back fight. So Hawaii actually was part of the fabric of laws of war as a neutral state. And Hawaii's been declared neutral since 1840s, recognizing its treaties. By 1893, Hawaii has over 90 embassies and consulates throughout the world. That's pretty impressive. I think they had less than 10 embassies, London, Paris, Washington, D.C., Lisbon, but it also had consulates. The difference between a consulate and an embassy is striking. An embassy, you will only find them in the capital of countries because they represent the government to that country, right? Consulates are not necessarily found in capitals, but consulates are found throughout the cities that protect the citizenry of that particular country, whether they live there or whether they do business there. Yeah? Today we have what is called the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Did you know if you're a foreigner and you're in California, you get arrested, the first thing that they have to tell you when you tell them I'm Swiss, they give you the phone number to the Swiss consulate to seek legal advice. Hawaii had all these consulates. That means that Hawaii was not only acknowledged as an independent state, it was actually a part of the international fabric. Also economy, the political economy, the trade. You don't just set up a consulate in a city because you want to put it there. You put it there for a reason, whether there's some interest of that country in that area, right? Make sense? You guys still following me, huh? Because, I see all you folks, but you folks don't see me. So when I see somebody's eyes going cockeyed, like, what is he talking about? I'll probably crack a joke, maybe tone it down a bit, and then we'll start again. But you guys all good, right? You're following me? Okay. Here's a good one. The Hawaiian Kingdom. The founder of modern China, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Did you know he attended Iolani and Puno? Yeah, 1870s. Wow. What is more powerful in this is what he learned. Hawaii is fully constitutional, very progressive. Yeah, there were checks and balance even on the monarch. Did you know the monarch, after 1864, no act of the monarch was valid unless countersigned by a cabinet minister who held accountability to the legislature where they could be impeached and tried. Yeah, I think America is thinking about what kind of check they could do for Trump. There's no check and balance on that executive. That guy is just running amok. They should look at our Constitution. But the bayonet is what screwed it all up. But prior to that, Hawaii had its checks and balances. It promoted literacy, education across the board, not racial, determined by race. Here's what Dr. Sun Yat-sen said in 1910 to a reporter in Hawaii about his time here. Because his brother, Dr. Sun Yat-sen's brother, was a cook at Ulupalakua Ranch. And the brother brought him to Hawaii to be educated. So this is what he told the reporter. This is my Hawaii. Here I was brought up and educated. And it was here that I came to know what modern civilized governments are like and what they mean. That means the Hawaiian Kingdom influenced Dr. Sun Yat-sen's revolution when he went back to China against the Chinese monarchy. That's pretty powerful. But some people assume he was talking about the United States because people go, well, Hawaii's a part of the United States. Well, he's talking about, well, it's the United States that he learned what civil governments are like. Let's kind of put it in context. 1870s, Dr. Sun Yat-sen was not in America, but he was here. But let's just entertain the fact that he's in America. Let's say Dr. Sun Yat-sen is in San Francisco in 1879. He is not going to learn what civil rights are. What you have in America is the Chinese Exclusion Act. Racial discrimination. Do you know Chinatowns throughout America? Segregation, because the Chinese could only live there. Yeah, those are Chinese ghettos. Very different than how we see it today. Did you know there was no Chinatown in Hawaii? Chinatown popped up after 1893 in downtown Honolulu because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Dr. Sun Yat-sen did not learn what civilized governments are like in America. He could only have learned it in Hawaii. So now within that context, can we all come to an agreement that we cannot deny in the 19th century, Hawaii was its own country? Yeah, it was its own country. So as its own country, then it comes under international law. What happened? Where did things change from a state of war or state of peace to a state of war and illegal occupation that the NEA is going to be documenting, and that the occupation that we are researching and teaching at the university? Where did it start? In March of 1893, President Cleveland initiated an investigation into the overthrow. He succeeded President Benjamin Harrison in March. Yeah? On December 18th, 11 months after the event in January, the president reported to Congress his findings and conclusions of his investigation. So let's now look at what he said with regard to a country. On the 16th day of January, 1893, between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a detachment of Marines from the United States steamer Boston with 2 pieces of artillery landed at Honolulu. The men, upwards of 160 in all, were supplied with double cartridge belts filled with ammunition and with haversacks and canteens, and were accompanied by a hospital corps with stretchers and medical supplies. Wow. That's what went down in Hawaii. What is that? What do you call that in international law? President Cleveland said, this military demonstration upon the soil of Honolulu was of itself an act of war. That is exactly what President Roosevelt said on December 7, 1941, but referring to the Japanese. That's a heavy word from a president. He then continues to refer to the Queen and the situation. He says, on the one hand, she had possession of the palace, of the barracks, of the police station, and had at her command at least 500 fully armed men and several pieces of artillery. So even though Hawaii was neutral, you still had a military to enforce what may need to be enforced. Indeed, he says, the whole military force of her kingdom was on her side and at her disposal, while the Committee of Safety, this self-declared group of 18 people that the U.S. ambassador said is a new government, had discovered that there were but very few arms in Honolulu that were not in the service of the government, because their whole basis was relying on the U.S. Marines to protect them. He stated, in this state of things, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents, he used the word insurgents. Sanford Dole was an insurgent. He's a criminal. You know, we use insurgents today. He was an insurgent. Here's the president calling them insurgents, not a real government. In this state of things, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents alone, her course would have been plain and the result unmistakable. But the United States had allied itself with her enemies, had recognized them as the true government of Hawaii, and had put her and her adherents in the position of opposition against lawful authority, the United States. Now imagine you're the Queen in that position. You're neutral, you have an invasion, you could all-out war, death take place. You're faced with a huge command decision. You know this in her mind, this thing can be resolved because that U.S. ambassador was the manufacturer of this whole thing. It wasn't the United States, but she had to get the United States to investigate. So remember the first stage of war? Act of war. January 16th, 1893, invasion by the United States, the troops, which ultimately would lead the following day, January 17th, to a surrender, a conditional surrender. So she says she knew that he said that she knew that she could not withstand the power of the United States, but she believed that she might safely trust to its justice. Now let's read the Queen's surrender within the, remember, comprehension now, within this context. I, Lili Okalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution. Remember, she's a constitutional monarch. She's not above it. She's under it. Under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the Kingdom of Hawaii. It says Hawaiian Kingdom. The only, you know what, where you reference the Kingdom of Hawaii is the 1993 Apology Resolution passed by Congress. Back in the kingdom, they only refer to as Hawaiian Kingdom, not Kingdom of Hawaii. So that's another word we got to correct. Stop saying Kingdom of Hawaii, it's Hawaiian Kingdom. By the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional or temporary government. That I yield to the superior force of the United States. She's talking military. She's not talking to the insurgents. She's yielding to the military. Whose minister, the ambassador, John Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the provisional government. Now, to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and imperiled by said force, yield my authority. She's not giving away the country. She's yielding her authority as the executive to carry out the law. She's putting it on hold. until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Doesn't that make more sense now in light of this context? Right? Remember, she's coming from a country, not a native group of people. She's representing a country. President Cleveland then refers to these insurgents, said, when our minister recognized the Provisional Government, the only basis upon which it rested was the fact that the Committee of Safety declared it to exist. Then he further stated, it was neither a government de facto nor de jure. Another buzzwords, these are trigger words in international law. A government de facto, a de facto government is a successful revolution, meaning it's an internal revolt. He said it wasn't internal. And he said it wasn't lawful through appointments, the status of the provisional, it's self-declared. Okay? The president acknowledged that this group of insurgents was propped up by the U.S. ambassador. And we have a problem, because that's a U.S. ambassador that did that, not an American, not just an American citizen. And ambassadors in countries actually represent the president. And whatever they say, you can say the president said it. That's why you only find ambassadors in capitals of cities who have relationship with the receiving government. Then he makes this political determination. By an act of war, the government of a friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. He just acknowledged it was unjust. Remember just and unjust? It's unjust. International law then requires to transform this state of war into a state of peace with the Treaty of Peace. We don't have a Treaty of Peace. Doesn't exist. We're still in a state of war. And economic and psychological warfare continued after 1893, which is why we think the way we think. So we become now the evidence of the crime. The fact that you don't know, that's criminal. Not that you're a criminal, but you're the evidence of the crime, called denationalization. That's pretty wild, though, but it's true. So on January 17th, 1893, the Hawaiian Kingdom came under belligerent occupation. The problem is the United States did not comply with the law of occupation to administer the laws of the occupied state. Instead, they hid it. Like Umi referred to it as the inertia. They just made like it didn't exist. But they didn't change anything other than the education. Because the only thing that really happened here was changing the mindset. Nothing physically changed, right? It's just a mindset. So the law of occupation acknowledges and recognizes two legal systems that exist at the same time: the occupier and the occupied. The occupied is occupied because it doesn't have effectiveness, right? It's the occupier that has effectiveness. So if you have effectiveness, you're supposed to administer the laws of the occupied state during a belligerent occupation and prepare ultimately for a treaty of peace, and the occupation ends. That didn't take place because they were hiding the occupation. Because what the United States wanted here, it was not about sugar that these insurgents were high on, right? You guys got that one? Sugar. They was all high on sugar, doing crazy. You know what Batu does, huh? You think you're crazy. These guys were all high on crystal sugar back in 1893. They were doing crazy things. Native Hawaiians were also committing high treason too. This was not a racial thing. They was all high. They couldn't think straight, right? The issue in Hawaii, the reason why the Americans invaded Hawaii, this administration, not America, the Harrison administration, Pearl Harbor. This whole thing was about Pearl Harbor. From the beginning till now, it was always about Pearl Harbor. Now, according to Judge Crawford from the International Court of Justice, belligerent occupation does not affect the continuity of the state, even when there exists no government claiming to represent the occupied state. That's another way of saying international law protects us without even knowing we're protected. Because we're occupied, we don't need a government. We just need to have the occupier administer the laws of the government you overthrew. 2003, when Saddam Hussein, his government was overthrown militarily, that did not mean Iraq ceased to exist. The government was overthrown, Iraq still existed, and the Coalition Provisional Authority replaced Saddam Hussein's position and began to administer temporarily Iraqi law. They never administered American law because Iraq was still independent even after its government was overthrown. So again, an example of what independent means. Yeah? So we have to know, first of all, in this process of comprehension, we need to know and distinguish between the state, which is the country, and the government. In 1893, that government was illegally overthrown, unjustly, by an act of war, which triggered state of war. That did not mean the Hawaiian state ceased to exist. But we didn't learn that. A lot of times we say the Hawaiian kingdom was overthrown. Wait. What was overthrown? The Hawaiian kingdom government or the Hawaiian kingdom? And can you overthrow a country? No, you can't, but you can physically overthrow a government. Now, can one country acquire another country? That's called a treaty. But you need governments to represent the countries to negotiate the treaty. No government, no treaty. We're occupied. Does that make sense now? Okay. So, what happened? Why is it that we think the way we think? There's a reason. There's a very good reason. The only change to the Hawaiian Kingdom government in 1893 was the removal of Queen Liliuokalani and her cabinet of 4 ministers. Just 5 people, including Marshal Charles Wilson. So we're talking 6 people. Did you know they were replaced forcefully and illegally by the Executive Committee and Advisory Committee. So the Executive Committee was 4 people led by Sanford Dole, and the the Advisory Committee, made up of 14 people, was led by Samuel Damon, who was also called the Vice President of this so-called group, self-declared group. Everyone in government stayed the same. Did you know that the police force comes from the Kingdom era? Board of Education, Kingdom era. This entire system is from the Kingdom era. All they did was take over the pilot of this plane called Hawaiian Airlines. Yeah? And then protect the pilot so nobody could get him with US Marines, and begin to release sleeping gas into the cabin. And through time, we fell asleep. And we went into a dream state. And somebody's whispering in our ear, "You're American. This is America. This is American Airlines, not Hawaiian Airlines. This is American Airlines," you know. I mean, you gotta laugh. Actually, they almost accomplished it. But you know, after 100 years, the paint started chipping off the plane, you know. People start to realize they're in the wrong plane. They thought they was flying America. They're in the Hawaiian Kingdom. Then somebody sitting in row 13E, who's Italian, who just now realized he's looking at the Italian plane flying outside, Italia, and saying, I need help. I have a treaty. You know, everybody's starting to wake up in the cabin. My focus is the pilot. I don't want that pilot do a nosedive economically and politically. So I got to figure out a way, how do we get to that pilot to tell him, brother, you can fly, but you got to fly this way. You got to follow these rules, okay? I'm not trying to remove you. I just want to hold you accountable, because you just are now starting to wake up to the reality that you're illegal and everything is affected. So let's fix this problem. But before we fix it, we need to understand it. So all we had was a name change. The Provisional Government, the name merely replaced the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Everything else stayed the same. Did you know the majority of the public schools, actually all the public schools in Hawaii, go back Kingdom era? Majority of the ILH schools, the private schools, all go back Kingdom era. St. Louis College, 1846. Iolani College, Punahou. Oahu College, which is Punahou now. St. Andrew's Priory. Did you know they were all established before Kamehameha? Kamehameha was 1887. That's a young school compared to all these other schools. So when you see it from that standpoint, you kind of trip out like, this is actually the same thing. The best way to hide something from somebody is right in front of you. And wait a minute. I'm in the kingdom. I'm in the position of an insurgent that was there before me. And I was led to believe I was American, but everybody's waking up. That's what's starting to happen. So in 1894, the name changed to the Republic of Hawaii, same entity, self-declared. Territory of Hawaii, 1900, the Organic Act. Congress passed a law saying this is the territory of Hawaii, which used to be the Republic of Hawaii. Now, remember country sovereignty? Can one country's legislature pass law that can be applied in another country? No, that's just basic international law 101. So then how can Congress create the territory of Hawaii if Hawaii is not part of the United States? It can't. All it did was name change. Then in 1959, the Statehood Act. Name change, territory to the state. Did you know nothing actually changed over 100 years except names and mindset? That's all. Actually, the state of Hawaii today is the governmental infrastructure of the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's pretty mind-blowing. See, it's not like natives got to go build their tribal government. Wait. I'm actually part of the majority of the nationals of this population. But since we're occupied, you're supposed to be following the laws of occupation. Now I'm starting to wake up to that. But see, the problem is, well, now my cousin is a cop. He's not the insurgent of 1893. That's my cousin. My auntie works for OHA. I got my friend who's a judge. Whoa, it's like the greatest nightmare just came alive. But you cannot deny the fact Hawaii is not part of the United States and it's occupied. So stages within a state of war, Hawaiian Kingdom, January 16th, state of war initiated, invasion. President Cleveland initiated it. January 17th, surrender. 1893 to 2017, right now, belligerent occupation. We've been belligerently occupied even though you didn't know it, right? And no treaty of peace. We're still occupied. State of war ensues today. There are certain rules that apply. All of a sudden, my training in the Army, U.S. Army Field Manual 27-10, oh, now that applies. Explains how occupied territories are governed. The Hague and Geneva Conventions apply. Whoa, a lot of Hawaiians was in the military. Guess what? This is talking our language now. It applies to Hawaii. So, why is it that we don't know any of this information? Brainwashing. 1906, program for patriotic exercises to be used in a public school. The theme of the program was to indoctrinate the children of Hawaii to be American and to speak English. If you spoke Hawaiian, you get beaten. We hear the stories of the kupuna telling us. But even Chinese speaking Hawaiian get beaten because Hawaiian was the national language. This process is called denationalization. Denationalization is a war crime during a state of war. Germans were prosecuted for denationalization, applied in Luxembourg, parts of France, Holland, part of the Nuremberg trials. Yeah. Italy, under Mussolini, committed Italianization in Yugoslavia when it occupied territory. The children. They couldn't control the adults, get the children. That is my grandparents' generation. My tutu was born in 1910. My great-grandparents were born in 1880. So my great-grandfather was 13 years old in 1893. But my tutu was right in the thick of things as a child. This is interesting. In 1906, a reporter from Harper's Weekly magazine came to Hawaii to do a story on this brainwashing. How was that? Doing a story on the brainwashing. They visited the public school of Ka'iolani Public School, okay, Ka'ahumanu Public School, and Honolulu High School before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School. And 640 school children from grade 1 through 8, at the command of the principal, stand at attention and they start marching. And this article is documenting it from the Harper's Weekly magazine. And this reporter was amazed at how disciplined the children were, right? And then the principal gives them a command. They all line up in front of the American flag, and the command of the principal, they salute like this. Not like this, like this. This is a civil salute, yeah? Until Hitler hijacked it, and then everybody goes like this now. America used to go like this. That's the civil salute. So here's all the children, 614 school children, saluting. Let me read to you what it says under the picture. At the command of the principal, it says, they yell in unison, "We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag." That's my tutu's generation. This scene shows the salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Kaiulani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. The word inculcate is brainwashing through repetition. That's inculcate. You can look it up. So they're basically brainwashing the children into believing they're American. By the time it got to my parents, my dad at St. Louis, it's already institutionalized. By the time it got to me at Kamehameha, when I graduated in 1982, I had no clue. Out of sight, out of mind. In fact, I went on to a military college to get my commission as a second lieutenant because I thought I was an American and be like my uncles in the military. And then realized not. But that was the beginning. So this is the reason why we don't know. Now, you notice what they did here. They effected change through education. How do you respond to that brainwashing? Education. Reverse it. This is not responding to it, you reverse it. Because when you reverse it, you control it. When you respond to it, somebody else pushing your buttons. See, now you're getting pissed off all the time. And maybe it's you not really getting pissed off. It's the guy pissed off using you for his agenda. Reverse it. That's what we got to do. Go back in time, that mo'okuauhau, and start reversing. See, that's called ho'oponopono. But education is key, because education was key to create our situation now. But now we're going to educate the right way. Yeah? Not argue it, present it. Create constructive dialogue. There is no bad question. There's no racial connotation. It's just historical accuracy. Use the right terms. Use the right language. So, comprehension. I'm basically showing you what comprehension does. It'll force you to see things in a different way than you may have formerly seen it. What we have flying constantly in America, throughout Hawaii, there's a sign of American occupation that we've kind of just taken for granted. Remember that flag that I showed you that has the Union Jack that Kamehameha ordered the creation of, which was revised in 1845 by the legislature in the kingdom? That's the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. That's a national flag, right? When that flag flies, that's the country. When you see the American flag fly, that's the country. When you see the British flag fly, that's the country. So that flag is the country flag. But now let's revisit what we've always been used to, but yet desensitized. A different meaning comes up. Sign of occupation, right there. Because these are two co-equals. How come one is under it? That's a sign of occupation right there. That's evidence. It shouldn't be like that even during occupation. So you see how you start to see things differently now, yeah? It's like I'm showing you what yellow looks like. Now you're seeing a lot of yellow that you never knew because you didn't know what yellow was. Make sense? Okay. So now we're going to get to how do you fix this problem. I'm not into exacerbating the problem, right? I want to fix it. I got to live here too. You know, I'm not here to blow this place up just to prove a point. We have to get educated, start to wake up. And some people, when they wake up and it's not time, you know, they get real grouchy. Hey, uncle, go back sleep, go back sleep. We'll wake you up later, you know. We'll wake you up with Portuguese sausage frying, you know. Make it slow and easy. But some of us, we up already, you know. We got to start cleaning up this house as uncle and auntie is still sleeping over there. It's okay. They're just having a bad dream that this is America. I was sleeping too, and I had that bad dream. So since 1893, there has been no lawful government in Hawaii, right? Any American government in Hawaii cannot be lawful unless it's here under the laws of occupation to administer the laws of the occupied state. There has been no Hawaiian government here since 1893 when Queen Liliuokalani conditionally surrendered. So we basically have a state without a government, right? A state still exists, but no government. Now, since there's no government, you can't have elections. So if you can't have elections, how do we bring back a Hawaiian government? See, it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you know elections are not about private people registering each other to vote? No, it's from the executive branch of an already established government that registers voters. Then who sets up the voting polls? The executive branch. Who calls the legislature into session? The executive branch. So you need the executive branch to have elections. But during occupations, how do you have that? Right? You can understand what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You got some sovereignty groups that are claiming we had an election. Wait. No, you couldn't have an election. No, we did it because, start off with step one. Who registered vote? Oh, my cousin. You answered my question right there. That's not a government. So whatever came out of that was just like how people vote for officers in private clubs. Nothing wrong with that. Anybody can vote, good. Somebody wants to be the Grand Poobah of the Water Buffalo Lodge, not a problem. But that's not a government. I understood that because I'm looking at not critiquing, I'm looking at understanding of what is currently going on when I retired in 1994, about to embark on this path that has got to me to where I'm at. I had to assess what was in front of me. I had to look at what worked, what didn't work. I needed to capitalize on this, learn from that. I cannot just throw my 2 cents and say, I'm gonna do it, and become a sovereignty group and be a part of a sovereignty movement that operates on the premise that we're gonna break away from the United States because we're not sovereign yet. I'm not into breaking away. I was in the army. That's treason. You know, you cannot divorce if you was never married. So the issue is not the divorce. The question is, where's the marriage certificate? Guess what? We don't have any. Okay, I guess we're kidnapped. Then there are rules of kidnapping. So then, what we need to bring out, a government. Because only a government can speak on behalf of a state. That's how international law works. But how do you bring back a government without having an election, but you can't have an election during occupation? Well, how did other countries do it? Like World War II. Let me use Belgium as an example. Belgium was invaded by Germany. King Leopold was the constitutional monarch. He was captured by the Germans at the start of World War II. Belgians fled, went to London. They formed a provisional government, acting government, called a government in exile. They weren't elected. There is a justification called necessity. Did you know we used to do it in the army? A private can become a lieutenant in time of war, but he is only the acting lieutenant. Until a properly commissioned officer comes, he gets relieved, he goes back down being a private. Until then, he carries vicarious liability as if he's the lieutenant. And back in the army, nobody wanted to assume the chain of command because vicarious liability is liability. And nobody really wants to take that position, but you have to assume the chain of command because you have to maintain the command structure. Same thing. Now, the Belgians could have done it in Belgium, not in London, in exile, but if they went into Belgium to create an acting government representing the Belgian state to ensure that the Germans comply with the law of occupation, they might get shot by the Germans. That's why they're all made in exile. What we're going to do is we're going to create a provisional government here in Hawaii because nobody's going to shoot us because nobody even knows what's going on. I'm going to operate from the premise everybody's sleeping. I'm protected now. But whatever I do with the people I do it, I could be incriminating myself by doing it a particular way because that information could be treason that I'm committing against the Hawaiian Kingdom. This is not intent. This is called procedures and making sure you meet, dot the I, cross the T. So I had to do my own due diligence, and I did. So in 1995, a legitimate provisional government was established. A legitimate. So remember I told you, I'm not responding to 1893, I'm reversing. So you know those guys in 1893 who claimed to be a provisional government? Did you know they based it on necessity? It was based on necessity. They were saying the queen was a tyrant. Natives can't govern. We have to govern because we're superior. That's justification to be self-declared as a provisional government. But if it is justified, it is legal. Well, President Cleveland said it was illegal. So you know what? They did it the wrong way. What we're going to do is do it the right way. Make sense? So, the doctrine of necessity. And this is from a court case where a British national in the 60s was brought up on charges of treason because the governor general of this British colony was killed and he assumed the role. They actually brought him up on treason. He was found not guilty because of necessity. So this came from the court case. And this is what we're going to use to guide us to not make mistakes, but to capitalize on successes. So the court said an imperative necessity must arise of the existence of exceptional circumstances not provided for in the Constitution for immediate action to be taken to protect or preserve some vital function of the state. You notice they're separating state from government. Okay? There must be no other course of action reasonably available. Actions taken must be necessary in the interests of peace, order, and good government. It must not impair the just rights of citizens under the Constitution, even if the citizens don't even know they got rights. And it must not have the intention of consolidating power. It's provisional. It's temporary. It's because of a crisis. It's called crisis management. That's what provisional government is. But you're also venturing on the thin line of it's treason if we violate those principles. And any of you can come after me 25 years later because there's no statute of limitation for treason. So I'm about to embark on a process. I better know what I'm embarking on. And I just made sure that I take the steps slow, methodical, procedural, and CYA amongst everybody who's still sleeping in the cabin. Because I know eventually you guys are going to start waking up. And I might be in trouble. So it's called preemptive maintenance. Now, this is what U.S. constitutional scholar Thomas Cooley, a very well-known U.S. scholar, okay, from Michigan. This is what he says is a provisional government. And what's interesting is his statement was 1893 in response to the provisional government of Hawaii. And he was saying, you're not a provisional government because you did not meet this certain elements of criteria. So he was against annexation, and he was a U.S. constitutional scholar. This is what he said in 1893 of what a provisional government is supposed to be. Now, what I read to you, that was what a provisional government can be in the 1960s. This is 1893, Thomas Cooley. A provisional government is supposed to be a government de facto for the time being. A government that in some emergency is set up to preserve order, to continue the relations of the people it acts for with foreign nations until there shall be a time and opportunity for the creation of a permanent government. It is not in general supposed to have authority beyond that of a mere temporary nature resulting from some great necessity, and its authority is limited to the necessity. Pretty consistent with 1960s. Wouldn't you think I could follow these things? Now I say, okay, let's form a provisional government and start reversing things from the past to make things right. So the state still exists. We created a provisional government in 1995. We do not represent the people. We represent the state, because that's what provisional governments are, right? But people are protected by the laws of the state that we are seeking the United States to comply, but we have to expose first. So the purpose of the provisional government as officers de facto, first to expose the prolonged and illegal occupation of Hawaii. That's the first thing. Just start talking. And I did that back in 1995. Actually, some people thought I was part of a sovereignty group, going around trying to compete. I said, no, I'm just explaining. These are the laws. People thought we were crazy, but it's true. And I was consistent because that's my mandate. I accepted it, I got to do it. And I carry vicarious liability if I don't. So we got to expose. Next, mandate, to ensure that the United States complies with the law of occupation, which includes the Hague and Geneva Conventions, compliance. And then third, to provide for an effective transition to a permanent government when the occupation ends, a treaty of peace has been signed. That's all we do. We don't have effectiveness, because you can't, you're occupied. All we have is the truth, and we're representing the sovereignty of a country that still exists. Just as other countries did, or were represented during World War I, World War II. Governments in exile, we're actually not in exile, we created here. Now, as we're going around giving talks, I'm going around giving talks, there's something that happened here on the Big Island. Back in 1998, I was giving a talk about gotta follow the law. I think it was at Shipman Industrial Park at some place, okay? And I'm explaining, and people who were there would remember that's what I do. That's why everybody says Keanu's been very consistent. He keeps talking law. Well, now you know why. I wasn't telling anybody sign up, just knowledge. There's this one guy there that I met. His name is Lance Larson. I met him through a friend of mine named Elliot Matos. So he's in the back watching me give this talk. I forgot where I was, but it was here. And he's from Big Island, East Side. So I remember some of the questions that came out from the audience was, so you're saying, Keanu, we got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law? I said, yep, got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. I know that might be difficult because of what's going on, but my job is to explain to you, you got to follow the law. Then I'm using, back then I didn't have PowerPoints. Yeah, you remember? I had transparencies on an overhead projector. That's what I had. You know, I'm showing actual laws from the kingdom in 1893. And you know what? I was saying the same thing back then. In fact, a friend of mine found, I'm on his doctoral committee. He said at UH, the audiovisual center at Sinclair, there was Namakoka Aina, you know, the production company. There was a DVD titled Hawaiian Kingdom Law, Keanu Sai, and it was 4.5 hours. Filmed at the Queen Lili'uokalani Children's Center in Hilo, 1998. He said he watched it, 4.5 hours, calls me back and he says, brah, you're saying the same thing except you got alphabets at the end of your name called PhD. I said, I've been very consistent because one, I had a mandate of responsibility. Another is that my research only confirmed what I already knew. So that's what I was presenting when Lance was in one of these talks. So what ends up happening is, long story short, Lance realized that there's no law in the Hawaiian Kingdom on driver's licenses because automobiles did not exist in 1893. Natural deduction. So basically, this is what he decided to do on his own. He had a Jeep Comanche, a white Jeep Comanche. He actually took off his license plates and put a big placard on the back of his truck, restating Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, which says the laws are obligatory upon all persons, whether subjects of this kingdom or citizens or subjects of foreign states while within the limits of the kingdom. And he started to drive around Hilo, got a lot of tickets. In fact, I know the police officer that gave him all the tickets. Well, trial comes up. He has an attorney representing him. Her name is Ninia Parks. Here's a story behind the story. Ninia was an adopted child, raised in America, wanted to find her birth parents. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed wahine. Look haole, right? She found out she's Hawaiian. She wants to find her Hawaiian parents. She came to Hawaii and she found them. She also found out that this is what she told me. She said that I believe it's her great-great-grandfather, William Kinney, the attorney who prosecuted Queen Lili'uokalani in that kangaroo court for treason or misprision of treason. She's a direct descendant of William Kinney. In her mind, she told me she had to make right. So she wanted to represent Hawaiian subjects who are dealing with the occupation. That's the kind of clientele she was helping. So she became Lance Larson's attorney. That's pretty cool, yeah? So Ninia at the trial, she has me as an expert witness, and we're at Kealo District Court, the old district court by the police station. Yeah. So I'm brought in as an expert witness, and I get actually admitted as an expert witness by Sandra Schutte. Yeah, the prosecutor was trying to debunk my knowledge, and it was going nowhere. So Judge Sandra Schutte said, Keanu he's an expert in this area. I accept him as an expert witness. So then Niniya started asking questions. We talked about the treaty, no treaty, Hawaii's occupied, and Lance was standing on the fact that he's following Hawaiian law, not American law. So after the trial, Sandra Schutte comes back, makes her decision, and says, I'm going to fine you $900. And she tells Lance, and I'm watching this whole thing. She tells Lance, are you going to pay it? He says, no, you didn't show me the treaty. Because if I pay it, I'm committing treason against the Hawaiian kingdom. Not a group, the country. And she said, that's what I thought you'd say. So she ordered him to be incarcerated for 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. How's that? 7 days solitary confinement. Now, what happened out of that were 2 war crimes. Unfair trial under Article 147 of the Geneva Convention and unlawful confinement. That falls under the state of war. Then, Niniya Parks looks at me in a very different way. No, I was like, wow, I thought we was friends. She goes, you're responsible. The acting government, now it's not just me, I just run point. There's a lot of people behind me. But the acting government is responsible. You guys are supposed to protect my client. I went, you're right. We are responsible, because that's called vicarious liability, but we're not liable because we're not the ones administering or not administering Hawaiian law. It's the United States. So she ended up filing a complaint in federal court in Honolulu against the so Larson versus the United States, the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the United Nations. And she was trying to get her client out of prison because she was afraid Lance was going to get beaten up, trying to get habeas corpus. So she filed it in a federal court in Honolulu. The court was, the judge in the court was Judge Samuel King. You guys remember Judge Samuel King? He's part Native Hawaiian. He's since retired, but he was the judge. So the UN filed their pleading and said, hey, we have diplomatic immunity, which they did, so they removed from the docket. And then I was advised by Niniya Parks that the United States U.S. Attorney was moving to dismiss the case, a motion to dismiss and set up a hearing. So Niniya, we had a meeting, she had a meeting with the acting government, the council, and I explained to her, I said, you know, Niniya, this federal court here is no more legal than the court that locked up Lance. There's still American courts. It's just district court, federal court. Why don't we enter into a binding arbitration? So we recommended dismiss the United States off the docket. They don't need to be there. This is a dispute between you and the acting government for not protecting your client. Why don't we enter into an arbitration agreement, binding arbitration, have Judge King sign off on it, and have it leapfrog from federal court to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is here in the Netherlands. So she agreed. Judge King signed off on it, and it leapfrogged to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, called Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. She was alleging that we were negligent for allowing American laws to be imposed in Hawaii, which led to her client's incarceration and unfair trial. It was a sort of similar to a tort case, liability, right? Now, the Permanent Court of Arbitration was created in 1899. It's the oldest world court. The International Court of Justice was created in 1946 under the United Nations. They're both sitting in the Peace Palace. That's the Peace Palace. They're both sitting in that building. Permanent Court of Arbitration to my left, International Court of Justice to my right. And they deal with arbitration, but it has to be international. Private people cannot go to the Permanent Court of Arbitration to resolve a dispute. One of the parties has to be a state. Remember that word state is coming up again, right? Because you can be a state without a government. It's coming up again. Now, what the Permanent Court of Arbitration does, they don't have standing tribunals. What they do is they create ad hoc tribunals. depending on a dispute that is submitted to them for consideration. So if you have a dispute between Canada and Russia on boundaries, the Permanent Court of Arbitration will have to first determine whether or not one or the other or both are states, right? And that it's international. Then they will formulate a tribunal that would have arbitrators that have expertise in boundary disputes. That's what arbitration is. You bring in the experts that serve as the judges. And not that you have a judge where you got to bring in an expert to testify. The arbitrators are the experts. So they facilitate that. So here we are with this case, filed November 8th, 1999, by Ninea Parks, the attorney for Lance Larson. The Permanent Court of Arbitration receives it, and they have to do their due diligence. Now, imagine when they received it, the Hawaiian Kingdom. When I thought Hawaii was a part of the United States. But see, this is a legal institution. It's not a political institution. So they have to do their due diligence to determine whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists as a state. That's what they have to do. So the Secretary General did that. And then I get a call, was it February 2000? This is already what? November, December, January, February 2000. From 1999 to 2000. They had it for about 4 months. I get a call, and it's 11 hours difference. Yeah. And the Secretary General says, Mr. Sai, now I'm representing the Hawaiian government. I'm the lead agent with my legal team. Ninea Parks is representing Lance Larson, trying to sue us. He calls me, and he says, well, he didn't call me, actually. I called for a procedural matter, and I was told he wants to talk to me. That's why he came on the phone. He tells me, I remember this conversation very well. He says, we cannot deny the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom because Ninea provided all the basis in their claim to initiate arbitration. And he admitted that the Dutch treaty, the treaty with the Netherlands, was never canceled. We're in the Netherlands. So then he says, and I remember this, he said, in order to maintain the integrity of this case, because we're very procedural, he says, I recommend that the Hawaiian Kingdom, the government, provide a formal invitation to the United States to join in the arbitration. And I went, wow, that's a good recommendation. Because if anybody can dispute the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom, wouldn't you think it would be the United States? They're saying it's the 50th state. So in a way, that was a CYA on his part, because he had to make sure that he, in representing the Permanent Court of Arbitration, does not violate U.S. sovereignty. That's his concern. But he was then caught with this information. So myself and Ninea Parks traveled to Washington, D.C. We had a meeting with John Crook, his real name, John Crook from the U.S. State Department. He was an attorney that represents the United States in international cases. Basically, I said, well, here's the information that he reviewed beforehand. And we had a conference call after we dropped off everything. And then I said, well, I'm here to provide the United States a formal invitation to join in the arbitration because it was the United States that prosecuted Lance Larson, not us. That was your political subdivision. First thing he tells me, this case has been accepted by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. I said, yeah. In fact, there was a Secretary General that recommended that I provide the formal invitation. That's when he started to watch his P's and Q's. And I said, our discussion will be reduced to writing, and I'll submit this document of our meeting to the Permanent Court of Arbitration to make it part of the record that the United States was invited to join. And if you want to argue on whether or not Hawaii is a part of the United States, you know what? We'll change the arbitration. Here, we'll talk about the Hawaiian Kingdom now. We'll enter into another arbitration agreement. But it's going to be difficult for you to prove that this is Hawaii if I'm talking to you and I'm representing the Hawaiian Kingdom. Am I a ghost in your imagination that you're talking to? You can feel me? I'm real. So 1 week later, I get a call from the Deputy Secretary General from the Permanent Court of Arbitration, Phyllis Hamilton, who says that the American Embassy notified the court, the registry, that they have been invited to join the arbitration, but they declined to join the arbitration but that they ask permission from the Hawaiian Kingdom and Lance Larson's attorney to have access to all records and pleadings and transcripts. So I was being called by the Deputy Secretary General to get consent. 2 birds just got killed with 1 stone. They did not refute or deny the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state. And they also asked permission from the Hawaiian government to have access to the records, because only governments can represent states at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So you see how this game is played, but you got to know how to play it. This is football, not baseball. And football is a rough sport. People get hit hard. I had to make sure that we know how to play this game, where we're not sticking it in somebody's eye. We're just following the procedure. Just like the Secretary General said, in order to maintain the integrity of these proceedings, I recommend that you travel and provide the United States an invitation. Perfect. And I am the most conservative guy you're going to meet. I'm not radical. I'm a retired captain. I follow rules, right? If I got to demote somebody in my battery, hey, it's not my fault. That's your fault. Let me show you all the counseling statements. I'm just carrying out what you did to yourself. I'm just following the rules. Because people don't like what I'm saying, doesn't make it real. And when you attack somebody constantly, that means you're a threat. You guys notice I've been attacked all the time. It's not like somebody found me in Kau and I'm hiding out. I teach at UH. But the more they attack, the more it's real. But it only makes me pause to make sure it's done right. I have to accept and tolerate ignorance, which could turn into arrogance, which could turn to attack. So I'm walking very carefully. Manufactured charges back in 1990s on felony against me, claiming I stole people's lands. I told people don't pay their mortgages. That is so not true. But yet they convicted me of attempting to steal land, a Class B felony, but you cannot steal land because it doesn't move. No, it's called real property. It's called immovable. Did you know real estate in criminal jurisdiction, real estate is not the subject of larceny because you can't move it. Only personal property, movable objects can be subject to theft. This whole thing was manufactured. But it didn't deter me. I had to keep going because the more you attack, if it's not of substance, I'm right. I'm not here to have a popularity contest. I'm dealing with occupation. I'm dealing with brainwashing. But I got to be respectful. I got to be responsible. But every step I have to do that. So now today I have a PhD. I teach classes. I get to grade people now. Did you know I tell people, hey, you think this is America? You show me that Hawaii is a part of the United States. You get an A for the class. You don't have to show up. Where's the treaty? Okay, I'm glad you're back in class now. Okay, let's start off with terminology. So my approach is procedural because I know that's going to protect me despite popularity, right? So that was told to me by the Deputy Secretary General that the United States wanted access, which we said, and that was middle of March. April of 2000 is when the tribunal was formed, made up of 3 arbitrators, okay? So, give you an example how the Permanent Court of Arbitration operates. It's an intergovernmental organization that creates ad hoc tribunals. It has what is called institutional jurisdiction in order to form the tribunal on disputes between 2 or more states. So here's from the Permanent Court of Arbitration's website on past cases. This is Ecuador versus the United States. This is in 2011 regarding a treaty dispute. You notice, Permanent Court of Arbitration, the name of the claimant, Ecuador, state, United States, state. Then they create the tribunal. Okay? So the United States does use the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Also between a state and an international organization. In this case, Peru versus the United Nations. The name of the claimant, Peru, state, United Nations, international organization. Then they form the tribunal, right? Here's the Larson case between a state and a private entity. Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom. Larson, private entity, Hawaiian Kingdom, state. That's proof they verified and acknowledged the Hawaiian Kingdom is not part of the United States. That is profound right there. That's not political. It's procedural. Yeah? Now, basically, this is a dispute between Lance Larson and the Hawaiian Kingdom, whereby Lance Larson, a Hawaiian subject, alleges that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is in continual violation of the U.S.-Hawaiian Treaty and the Vienna Convention, and alleges that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is also, is negligent for allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over him, which led to his problem. That was our dispute. The treaty or contract under the proceedings, the 1849 treaty, language of the proceeding, English, seat of arbitration, Netherlands, arbitrators, Dr. Gavin Griffith, Professor Greenwood, Professor Crawford. Did you know Professor Greenwood and Professor Crawford are now judges on the International Court of Justice? They're selected by the United Nations. That gives you a sense of the caliber of who's sitting on the tribunal, which is important. And wouldn't you think the Secretary General is going to put the best people in this position, because everybody's going to be critiquing it, especially the United States. And representing Lance Larson is Nania Parks, and there's me representing the Hawaiian Kingdom, so I'm the lead agent. I'm very familiar with this case. At the core of this case was whether or not Lance Larson could sue the acting government for not protecting him, get reparations. But it wasn't the Hawaiian government that put him on trial. It wasn't the Hawaiian government that put him in prison. So the tribunal came out with a procedural order number 3 in July of 2000, and said that they are requested by Lance Larson to a judge that the United States has violated the rights of Lance Paul Larson. Once they adjudge that his rights have been violated, then they go to the second tier of that procedural order, that the tribunal adjudged that the Hawaiian government is liable for those violations. What is crucial here is what is called the indispensable third-party rule. Because international courts do not have subpoena power, they can't require countries to come in because they're sovereign. They have to rely on them coming in on their own. Remember when the Secretary General asked me to invite them in? So and the rule on the indispensable third party is that a tribunal cannot rule on the conduct, whether legal or illegal, of a state who's not a part of the proceedings. This is not about whether or not the kingdom exists. This is about whether or not Lance Larson can sue the Hawaiian government without the United States involved. Because he needs to get the tribunal to judge that his rights were violated when he's put on trial and incarcerated. But he can't do that without the United States. So that's what is called the indispensable third party rule. So Lance Larson, his attorney, had to overcome that. We're the defendants. We don't have to do anything. We just got to sit there, right? Just sit there. But we're not going to sit there. We're going to take advantage of this process. This is an international forum. We're going to showcase the country, because Lance Larson's counsel is not an expert in our country. We're the government. We're going to present it. So oral hearings were held in December of 2000 in the Netherlands. Yeah, actual hearings. And you will see me and some of my deputy agents raising arguments, but we're showcasing the country, putting it on stage. We want if America wants transcripts, we're going to give them something in the transcripts. We're going to take advantage of this opportunity, right? Now, this came from the American Journal of International Law, a very, very well-respected journal. This is not a political journal, it's a law journal. They, every year, cover past cases, international cases. They're going to cover the Larson case, and this is what they said without even talking to me. They just looked at the proceedings and the pleadings. At the center of the proceedings of the Permanent Court of Arbitration proceedings was that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, and that the Hawaiian Council of Regency, representing the Hawaiian Kingdom, is legally responsible under international law for the protection of Hawaiian subjects, including the claimant. American Journal of International Law is hitting it. In other words, the Hawaiian Kingdom was legally obligated to protect Larson from the United States' unlawful imposition over him of its municipal laws through its political subdivision, the state of Hawaii. As a result of this responsibility, Larson submitted that the Hawaiian Council of Regency should be liable for any international law violations that the United States had committed against him. This whole case was whether or not he can come after us for not protecting him. Because as a government, we're supposed to protect Hawaiian subjects. But during occupation, we can't because we're occupied and we don't have effectiveness. So it's a different way of thinking. The law of occupation, the rules of war have to apply. And these are the proceedings that took place at that court. So can you folks understand when I say these proceedings had nothing to do on whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. These proceedings are as a result of the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom and the liability of the acting government that was being called into question by Lance Larson. Now, during the proceedings, we were trying to get the tribunal to do something where we can use it to address this unlawful imposition. So we asked the tribunal, can you make a declaration saying the Hawaiian Kingdom exists, even though we all know it exists? Can you do this? That's all we're doing. But the fact that we were in the proceedings, in and of itself, the country exists. It exists. And you can see the levels of who are involved. This was not just me pushing. This is the United States State Department in Washington, D.C. This is the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. And attorneys and so forth. So, they acknowledge the Hawaiian Kingdom was an independent state. So in paragraph 7.4 of the arbitration award, a perusal of the material discloses that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States, Great Britain, and various other states. What is the power behind the term right here? Right there, this is an arbitration award that can be used in other international cases. And I'm going to show you it was used. But for now, it could be used because it's a decision by a tribunal. It said that the United States in the 19th century recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. What is an independent state? What is independence? Remember comprehension? Well, earlier we covered it. What is independence? Only your laws exist over your territory independent of other laws over other territory. So that statement right here, a legal translation, when it said the United States recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state in the 19th century, it says the United States recognizes that only Hawaiian Kingdom law applies to Hawaiian territory in the 19th century. So any American in Hawaii is subject to Hawaiian law. Now, from the 19th century till today, that independence hasn't changed, but it led to the current dispute between Larson and the Hawaiian government for allowing American laws to be imposed. That proves that American law could not be in Hawaii, at least in the 19th century, which includes to the date of the hearing that we're having right now. It shows continuity. Does that make sense? That's the legal translation of that, because people will read it and it goes right past them. They're saying the United States and Great Britain and other states recognize Hawaiian independence, meaning only Hawaiian law applies, not American law. Now, they're going to address the issue of indispensable third party. So there are two cases for the indispensable third party that are precedent. Monetary gold, removed from Rome. This was a case at the International Court of Justice in 1953 after World War II. Italy versus Great Britain, France, and the United States. At the center of the issue was gold, disbursement of gold. The problem is the gold that they're dealing with was owned by Albania, the Bank of Albania belonging to the Albanian state. Italy could not move against Great Britain and France and the United States without Albania as a necessary party, which they refused to participate because they would rather negotiate outside of the court and not go through the legal proceedings. So that was the first precedent case on indispensable third party. So Italy could not maintain its suit against Great Britain, France, and the United States, which led to negotiations after with Albania. Does that make sense? That was the first indispensable third party rule case. Second one was East Timor. East Timor is a country in the Pacific. East Timor in the 1990s was a Portuguese colony. It is now an independent state and a member of the UN, but back in the 90s, it was a Portuguese colony. Portugal withdrew from East Timor and allowed the United Nations to manage the process of self-determination for East Timor to become independent. As soon as Portugal removed itself, Indonesia invaded East Timor because of the resources. And they entered into an agreement with Australia for offshore mining. Portugal was saying, hey, that's still a Portuguese colony, that's our sovereignty. Australia is violating our treaty. So they filed case against Australia. So this is Portugal versus Australia for negotiating and mining off the shore of East Timor under an agreement with the occupier, Indonesia. The indispensable third party in that case was Indonesia, who refused to participate in these proceedings. So Portugal could not go after Australia for liability. That's the second precedent case. You guys, am I making sense as far as indispensable third party? Sorry we're getting technical, but hey, we got to, right? So that's what Lance Larson's attorney had to deal with, those two precedent cases. How could she say the Hawaiian government is liable without first getting the tribunal to rule that the United States violated Lance Larson's rights? She's stuck. So what ended up happening was the tribunal said they don't have jurisdiction over this dispute because of the East Timor and monetary gold case. And this is how they explain it. So now when I read it from the arbitration award, I think you folks will be able to understand it. Again, we're talking comprehension, yeah? Comprehension. Paragraph 1215. It follows that the tribunal cannot determine whether the respondent, the Hawaiian government, has failed to discharge its obligations toward the claimant, Lance Larson, without ruling on the legality of the acts of the United States. Yet that is precisely what the monetary gold principle precludes the tribunal or prevents it from doing. As the International Court explained in the East Timor case, the court could not rule on the lawfulness of the conduct of a state, the Hawaiian Kingdom, when its judgment would imply an evaluation of the lawfulness of the conduct of another state called the United States, which is not a party to the case. That's the indispensable third party rule. Okay? So they basically said Lance Larson cannot sue the acting government without the United States, so we won the case. But they threw something else in there. Fact finding. That's in the arbitration award. So it says here, at one stage of the proceedings, the question was raised whether some of the issues which the parties wished to present might not be dealt with by way of fact-finding process. In addition to its role as a facilitator of international arbitration and conciliation, the Permanent Court of Arbitration has various procedures for fact-finding, both as between states and otherwise, a state and a private entity. Okay? A request that the tribunal should reconstitute itself as a fact-finding commission would have raised a number of issues. A new compromise or agreement would presumably have been required. More fundamentally, the question would have been raised whether at least some of the objections to the admissibility of these proceedings discussed above would not also apply to fact-finding. So we found out today they don't. We now understand that a fact-finding commission of inquiry can actually look at the facts of a party, not to the proceedings. The tribunal notes that interstate fact-finding commissions so far held under the auspices of the Permanent Court of Arbitration have not confined themselves to pure questions of fact, but have gone on expressly or by clear implication to deal with the issues of responsibility for those facts. There have only been 5 commissions of inquiry at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. First one in 1905, the last one in the 1960s. Only 5. We could become the 5th. No, 6. The interesting point and important point here is fact-finding commissions of inquiry under the Permanent Court of Arbitration operate very similar to grand juries. They review the facts, assign responsibility, whether civil or criminal, but allow another court to prosecute. That's what they do. Very different from other fact-finding commissions. Let's say the Human Rights Council. All they do is look at facts, but they turn it over to the Human Rights Council to apply the law. Fact-finding commissions of inquiry at the Permanent Court apply the law. And here the tribunal is saying we could be reconstituted into a fact-finding commission of inquiry. They did not close the case. They left it open. Now, When the last day of the hearing took place at the Permanent Court of Arbitration on December 11th, we received a call in The Hague from an ambassador, Dr. Bio Zagawa, from the Rwandan embassy in Belgium, Brussels, Belgium. He actually was at the court a few days before and accessed all the records of these proceedings, because we made it public, not just for America, for everyone. Anybody can access the records. He wanted to meet with us in Brussels. So I believe it was December 12th or 13th. My legal team, we caught the train down to Brussels, Belgium to meet with the ambassador. We were met with his representative, put in a motorcade of a few cars, taken to a meeting that he had with other ambassadors, brought into the meeting. He greeted us, we greeted him. He excused himself from the meeting and says, please follow me. We go meet over here. So he escorts us to a little cafe. In Europe, it's all cafes. Coffee, cafes all over the place, especially in Brussels. This place is dark, this cafe. It's in the afternoon. He knocks on the door. The manager opens it, greets the ambassador, lets us in, closes the door, locks it, turns on the light, pulls the shades down, and has coffee ready for us. I found out that Rwanda had bought out that cafe for a couple of hours, so nobody's in there, just us. Then so I'm sitting in front of the ambassador, got my legal team behind me, and he says, he had access to all the records. His government has reviewed everything, and it is clear Hawaii is occupied. And this cannot be tolerated. This is the longest occupation ever. And he says his country understands when international law is violated, and the international community does not step in until it's too late. Folks know what he's referring to? Genocide, mass murder. About 1 million people were slaughtered in Rwanda. This Dr. Bio Zagawa was a Tutsi survivor. That's who he was. And he was at the court, in a court case with the International Court of Justice that was dealing with genocide between Congo and Belgium. So he says, I've been authorized by the president to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to me to convey to the acting government that Rwanda is prepared to report to the United Nations the prolonged occupation of Hawaii and ultimately bring it to an end. Yeah, so I'm sitting there going, whoa, this is 17 years ago, December. I look at him and I was like, wow. But I got to keep my poker face up. Inside I'm jumping, I'm like, yeah. Excuse me, Your Excellency, I need to speak to my legal team. So we talk, sit back down in front of the ambassador. Please convey to your president our sincere gratitude, but we cannot accept this offer at this time. Our people back home have no clue of our status. People believe this is the state of Hawaii, people part of sovereignty groups, people part of the Democratic Party, everybody's confused. I didn't say that to him, I'm talking real nice though. I said, we need to address denationalization and brainwashing. We have to go home and start to educate. And he thanked me. I said, no, thank you. That was December of 2000. January 2001, I entered University of Hawaii Political Science as an unclassified student because I missed the deadline to apply. I'm going to start taking classes. I'm going to get my master's degree specializing in international relations, and I'm going to go toe-to-toe with the misinformation being taught at the university. And I can tell you, I was not well liked at the University of Hawaii by Hawaiian scholars, because I basically just threw the whole thing upside down. We're not colonized. Stop calling us indigenous people. We're occupied. Hawaiian is a nationality, not an ethnicity. But you know how you change it? Even though they don't want change, you do research papers. You get things published, peer review, law review. You defend your master's, you defend your dissertation. So when I put my doctoral committee together for my PhD, I picked professors that I knew would not agree with me right off the bat. Because you're going to have to defend your dissertation and your research, not argue it. So I put people on my committee who I knew could hit me. That's what I want. It's called analytical rigor. Let's go. So you folks remember on Channel 4 News, there was an old holy guy, professor, political scientist, Neil Milner. He's always coming up. He's a political pundit during elections. Okay, Mufi's ahead, blah, blah, blah. He actually was the chairman of my doctoral committee. His background is law and judicial behavior. Neil, that's his area. Then I had John Wilson and Katharina Heyer, public law, and theory of sovereignty. Then I had the dean of the law school, Avi Soifer, U.S. constitutional law, on my committee. I want him to work it. I want him to poke holes in what I have. I need that. Then I had the dean of the University of London, Great Britain, on my doctoral committee, teleconferencing in from Great Britain. And then I only had one native Hawaiian on my committee, Dr. Kanalu Young, Hawaiian Studies, but he passed away before I defended, so John Osorio stepped in. 5 Haulis, 1 Kanak. But you know what? I wasn't here being racial. I'm looking at people who are qualified, who can address these issues. They couldn't refute it. Well, I guess that's why I got my PhD. I successfully defended my dissertation in 2008, but I worked with my committee members. What's your concern? Hey, dot the I, cross the T, what's that? Perfect, address. The last guy to keep critiquing my work, which I appreciated, was the dean of the law school, Avi Soifer. That we were going through it like a fine-tooth comb, and I'm saying, right on, let's go. We're engaging. Then I said, Avi, I addressed every concern you had. Is it satisfactory? He goes, yeah. You want to sign? Thank you. Went straight to grad division. You go, I'm going to walk and graduate. So it's not an easy process, right? But I had to do that because I had to ensure that my work that I had in my dissertation will be used to fix the problem. And the one thing that they told me was, Keanu, how do you fix the problem? So chapter 5 is titled, Beginning to Right the Wrong. And you know what that begins with? Education. Don't politicize it. Talk it. Talk straight. Let's have constructive dialogue. Not talking at each other. Yeah? But you have to know what you're talking about. So I since have been sitting on doctoral committees myself. I've been publishing additional articles. I was invited not just to Italy, but to University of Cambridge in England at an invitation only for a conference where our papers that we presented is going to be published by Oxford Press. You know, it's spreading. And this is the process, education. Remember the Hawaiian government mandate? Exposure. Exposure in every way. So, something happened that now redirected the attention on the Larson case. The South China Sea case. South China Sea case was held at the Permanent Court of Arbitration from 2013 to 2016. Philippines versus China. You guys heard of the South China Sea case? China's building islands in the South China Sea. They're like atolls, right? It's all over the news. One of the islands they were building was within the EEZ of the Philippines, the 200-mile radius. Philippines filed a complaint for binding arbitration under the Law of the Sea Convention at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. That's the case. So if you notice, Permanent Court of Arbitration, Republic of Philippines versus China, Philippine state, China state. Then they formed a tribunal. First thing that tribunal had to determine, the indispensable third party rule. Not about China, about the other bordering states of the South China Sea, which includes Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia. Would a decision that they will have to make in this tribunal, by this tribunal, would it affect or be an evaluation of the conduct of a state that is not participating, i.e. Vietnam? That's what they brought it up on their own, just like the tribunal in our case brought it up. Pretty heavy. So I read the decision, which this past summer ended the arbitration, and Philippines was able to get around the indispensable third party rule, because instead of asking the tribunal to determine or evaluate conduct, all they asked the tribunal to do was to determine whether or not these are islands or rocks, pursuant to the Law of the Sea Convention, because China was claiming a 200-mile EEZ off of an island. But if it's a rock, it's only 12 miles. So this proceeding would be preliminary to negotiations amongst the bordering states of the South China Sea. Okay? So that's how they got around it. Very cool. Lance Larson's attorney didn't have that ability. Because a rock, under the Law of the Sea Convention, is an atoll or a piece of or land that is above the water that is not habitable. There's no fresh water. So if there's no fresh water, it's just a rock, and a country can only claim a 12-mile radius called a territorial sea, if any country can claim it. It cannot claim to be an island which is habitable, which has water, capable of human habitation. If it is capable of human habitation, then you can extend a 200-mile radius. That's what they determine. All these islands that China's building are actually rocks, because they're bringing in water. It's not self-sustaining. Make sense? So then they were able to get to dispute and determine whether or not they're rocks or islands once they went past the indispensable third-party rule. So I'm reading the decision. I'm like, as a political scientist, I'm up at UH. You got to be up to speed with these international cases. So I'm like, South China Sea, indispensable third party. Wait a minute. It points to an arbitral award for jurisdiction 2 years earlier. I went, indispensable third party. In my mind, I'm thinking, I know there's only 2 cases in this, monetary gold and East Timor. But I'm thinking, what if the Larson case is involved with this somehow? So I went to go pull up the decision, the arbitral award. Lo and behold, paragraph 181. The present situation is different from the few cases in which an international court or tribunal has declined to proceed due to the absence of an indispensable third party, namely monetary gold removed from Rome in 1943, East Timor before the International Court of Justice, and Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. Wow. I almost jumped out of my chair. We're now the third precedent case that will be cited in all proceedings from now in international law. It goes on, in all of these cases, the rights of third states, respectively Albania, Indonesia, and the United States, would not only have been affected by a decision in the case, but would have formed the very subject matter of that decision. Exactly. You can't look at the conduct of the United States in our case without them there, so you can't make a decision they violate your rights, which is the very heart of what this case would be. Indispensable third party rule. And I was quite elated that this is an international court that came out with that. Accompanying this is education, what's happening, awareness. This is now international. And this got me thinking, I think it's time to go fact-finding. I think the time is right. Let's enter into an agreement with Lance Larson, go fact-finding upon the what was acknowledged by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the tribunal. This is where we can go. It didn't say you can create the fact-finding within 20 years. It said all it needs is an agreement. So what we're going to do is convene the original arbitrators who made the statement to be that commission of inquiry, because I found out that sitting judges on the International Court of Justice can also serve as arbitrators and commissioners at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So now the former tribunal, made up of now 2 International Court of Justices, with Dr. Gavin Griffith, who still serves as an arbitrator at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, all we're going to do is follow through on your note that we could reconstitute you. So, fact-finding, Permanent Court of Arbitration. Commissions of inquiry under the auspices of the Permanent Court serve in a similar capacity as grand juries. Commissions of inquiry not only review sets of facts, but also assign responsibility regarding these facts that could be civil liability or criminal liability in international law. To date, there have only been 5 international commissions of inquiry: Great Britain and Russia, 1905, Great Britain and Denmark, 1962. Now, at issue here is going to be the Hawaiian government with regard to Lance Larson. He's still a victim. The question is, can the Hawaiian government be held liable? That's what this commission is going to look at. And you know what? They may say, we have not done everything that we could have to prevent what occurred to Lance Larson. So this is not like a happy time, but this is a serious time. Now, what's important here is this agreement, which will form 3 commissioners under the Hague Convention. They will answer the first question. First, what is the function and role of the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom in accordance with the basic norm and framework of international humanitarian law? Humanitarian law is the law of occupation and laws of war. Now, to comprehend this, there's a lot that's said right there. Remember, during occupations, you have the occupier and the occupied existing at the same time, right? That's why we're there, but we're occupied. Before you can address what is the role of the Hawaiian government during occupation, you have to do that in the light of what happened since 1893. You have to address what the United States did or didn't do that got us into this situation of possible culpability of the Hawaiian government toward one of its nationals. Is it our fault that everybody's brainwashed? It is our fault that nobody knows nothing. Who's responsible for that? What about that denationalization process that went back in 1906? Who's responsible for that? They might be dead, but you might have a successor in that office that is holding that same position in the Board of Education. Who's responsible? So before they can answer that question, they have to address over 100 years of non-compliance to humanitarian law. That's how it works. Then, in light of all this, what do? Are we liable? Was it enough that I was sharing and getting attacked and getting arrested? What more could I have done? What more could the government have done? That's what we're going to know. Okay? Then, that's just general. Our responsibility generally. Second, what are the duties and obligations of the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom toward Lance Larson? And by extension toward all Hawaiian subjects residing in Hawaii and abroad. Okay, what do we do about Lance Larson? Do we sign a reparation where we now have to pay him? Are we guilty of that? Do we report his crimes to the International Criminal Court for prosecution? Where do we go? Let them tell us. They have the authority. We're in the procedures. So I don't know what they're going to say. I don't. Just as I didn't know what they would say during the proceedings of arbitration. I just know I have to take every step to protect the Hawaiian government. Because we're in it. But we're now being put to that test. So, we also realize that the commission, once convened, I'm actually heading out to London soon to begin that process. Once the commission has been convened, we're going to recommend, but they have to say it, we're going to recommend, because we already have a venue that someone has accepted to have the sitting for these proceedings. These proceedings, just as we had the hearing in The Hague, we're going to have the hearings in Hawaii. Oh yeah. That's pretty cool. I mean, this is not a political stunt. This is procedural. Because did you know back in the year 2000, we entertained whether or not the tribunal could have their hearings in Hawaii. That was under consideration. And after complete review, we said, no, this is confusion at home. Now, I think our people are ready. They have the knowledge, they have the understanding. They don't have to have all the answers. But I think you would have enough understanding that this is a real tribunal or a real commission under international law that's addressing these issues. Yeah? And that's what's happening right now. So now, let's revisit what happened on the 4th of July at the Native Education Association and its measure introduced by the Hawaii State Teachers Association. That the NEA, National Education Association, will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. Can you now understand the Commission of Inquiry will probably be looking into these very issues? Make sense? And with that, I'd like to bring it to a close. I'm glad you folks endured this talk, but it is long, but it's important comprehension, terminology, and don't be in a rush to find the answer. If anything, pause. Remember the practical value of history, that it's a film of the past run through the projector of today onto the screen of tomorrow. I think this shows you what you can do when you understand your history. Look how far we got. And with that, mahalo.
This is exciting times, gang. Very exciting. We're going to take a short break. And right after the break,